back out by Jamie Baker. Yushkevich wheels it back in. Lindros lost. Archibald takes him out of the play. Up with it is Recchi. Walks in front. Shot one, knocked down. Rebound, score! Lindros!
SportsNetwork.com and Wildfire Radio present the O&B Puckcast. I'm Isaiah, and I'm going to turn you over to our host tonight, Dan the Flyer fan. Dan?
That's right. I've been given the reins for the evening here. Very excited to host O&B for the first time. We have a very special guest, but first let's get to our other co-host of the evening. Chef, how you doing tonight?
Very good, very good. This is a little change of pace, and I kind of like it.
That's right. Well, our guest this evening, you may know his work from PhillySportsNetwork.com. Yariv Wolok is here. Yariv, how you doing?
Doing well, man. Doing really well. Last time I was on here, things were not so great. So a little more fun now to talk about the excitement. And, even if we don't make the playoffs, still a lot to be excited about. So definitely here to talk about some good stuff coming up.
Well, the Flyers are certainly pushing. They are 34-27-8 through 69 games. There's only 13 left. They are 13 points out of first place, 7 points out of third place, and only 3 points out of the second wildcard spot, though technically 4 because they do not hold any tiebreakers over Pittsburgh or Montreal, who are tied there with them for the second wildcard spot. The Flyers have been playing well lately. They are 4-1-1 since we last met. They lost to Columbus in overtime 4-3. They beat the Islanders 4-1, beat the Devils 6-3, lost to Washington in a game that was rather ugly. They beat the Islanders in a game that was rather ugly. And then last night they downed the Senators in what was a very ugly game overall, but they did come out with a win. Now, it felt like a trap game. They didn't fall in the trap. Isaiah, let's throw it to you first. How do you feel about the Flyers over the last stretch here?
Well, what do they have? The first or second best record in the league since January 14th. They're 18-4-2 with 38 points. So that's tied with the Lightning. So, look, they've been playing well. If we're honest, they've been behind in a lot of these games. They've been outplayed. The heat map has not favored them if you want to go analytics. But they're finding a way to put together a nice run. And more importantly, the contributions are coming from the younger players. We're seeing growth with guys like Sanheim, Konechny, Patrick, and recently, of course, Phil Myers. And that's not even to mention Carter Hart, who'll be back tomorrow.
Yeah, and Chef, I think that's another important point. No matter how this season ended, I think a lot of people just wanted to see improvement from the kids. And ever since they got rid of Hackstall, Patrick, Lindblom, Myers, Sanheim, Konechny, they've all really taken steps forward. And at the end of the day, whether they make the playoffs or not, that is a win in itself.
Yeah, sure it is. And I think that's a testament to two things. I think it's the coaching change and the whole atmospheric change, like the general manager change. This organization has a different feel to it now. There's a feel like before under Hextall, it felt like we were a little stagnant, like it was the same old, the status quo kind of thing. And here, it actually feels like we're moving forward. Whether whether or not, it's probably not the time for this debate, but whether or not he's going to be the coach next year is a different story. But I'll even go one further. He forgot to mention Lindblom. I think Lindblom has probably been the biggest asset to this team. Aside from your article about Scott Lawton, I think he's been the most improved player this season.
Yeah, Lindblom is, if I could just chime in, Lindblom is playing like a KG veteran with the smart plays, and his details are excellent.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think it's the kids that are taking the step forward. And Yariv, what have you seen out of the kids thus far that you really like the most and that is going to set the pace going into next season?
Well, honestly, for me personally, it's actually really exciting to see what Nolan Patrick is doing of late. I know he's been inconsistent both seasons at the start. I personally kind of expect that from a lot of young players and expect them to produce better as the season goes on. You can see that in my early articles from the beginning of the year. It's essentially what I said would happen. Saw it happen with Sanheim, even Myers. Now, all of a sudden, you can see his game has gone up a bit. But really, guys like Nolan Patrick, they're really, really critical because Patrick is actually at the point now where he's playing against top players in a somewhat shutdown and scoring role. So his role and responsibility has definitely increased, and he's handled it really well. I think Scott Gordon has done a great job with young players overall, just to, I think, maintain that positive attitude, the attitude of if you succeed or if you fail, you will still be given opportunities. You will not be demoted immediately, right? He's shown some really nice patience, and he's really worked on building chemistry. And again, I'll bring up Lindblom as well. You think about the type of player that Lindblom is, right? A two-way, complementary, with scoring upside forward. You put him with a guy like Sean Couturier, on paper, it just makes so much sense. He had the forthright to do that. And then to put Voracek, who's been struggling defensively, with two guys who are solid defensively. Scott Gordon's done a really nice job to incorporate the young player's strengths with other players. And I think another example of that is even Shane Gostisar playing with Phil Myers, right? Phil Myers is a big, brutish defenseman. You put him with a smaller guy like Ghost, each one of them can move the puck. Each one of them can skate. Theoretically, they should be able to complement each other really well as long as they play a responsible game. And so far, it seems like Myers has tried to keep things simple for the most part and allow Ghost to drive the play. And I think everybody knows their role. And I think we see that with the young players. And even if it gets elevated next year, they've kind of adapted their role this year. And even guys like Hartman, Lawton, everybody kind of knows where they belong. And you see that in the way they execute.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back even to last season, when Lindblom first got called up, he and Nolan Patrick formed a dynamic duo towards the end of the season, but the offense never really came. And, this offense still really isn't there. Patrick has a goal and 2 assists in his last 5. Lindblom has a goal and 2 assists in his last 5 as well. The offense isn't coming, but the more important thing is that they're playing really well. They can fix the scoring via free agency or trade or something. But the fact that these kids overall are really taking a bigger step forward is what is the most important right now, because it hopefully sets the foundation for what we see next season. And they need to get out of the gate fast in October, because that's what killed them this season. I mean, they could very well be sitting atop of the Metro right now if they didn't, mess around for the first 3 months. So overall, I think moving forward, no matter who the coach is, I think as long as these players just continue to work, and this defense is now here in Myers and Sanheim and Provorov and Gostisbehere and everybody kind of coming together and making this team better all at once is exactly what needs to be done here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
totally. You forgot about Morin and waiting in the wings to pick up the slack in case anybody fails.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is important to point out what you said, Dan. The defense, for the first time, while they're young, they're solidified. Our top 4, for the first time in a long time, on paper is solidified. You have 4 legitimate top 4 defenders, all able to play both ends of the ice. And honestly, I believe that's one of the biggest reasons we started producing again. The passes out of our own zone have been far improved, which is why you've seen a reduced role for somebody like Robert Haig, who is good on defense but struggles getting out of his own zone, right? That's why he's been demoted. And that's one of my favorite things about Gordon, is that he's kind of he's played to that. He's played to our puck-moving abilities rather than forcing guys who block shots and play a physical game, which we need to take the main stage. He kind of toned them back down to play more of a PK defensive role and allow the kids to kind of handle the offensive role, which I think has definitely paid dividends in Scott Gordon's case.
Yeah, I mean, Scott Gordon has been a ray of sunshine for the team. Whether he's the guy in the future or not, he has done so much for the kids. And I had Shane Mead of the Always Next Year podcast on my podcast, Brotherly Pod, last week. And he basically said a theory that I've danced around for a while and never said out loud, but he said that they fired Dave Haxtell, and then they brought in Gordon, and then they brought all the kids up. They brought Myers, and they brought Hart, and they let all these kids flourish under Gordon because they're familiar with him. And I think it's the familiarity there, Chef, that kind of comes through and helps these kids grow because they're around a coach that they're familiar with versus Dave Haxtell, who's trying to pigeonhole them as certain, types of players that they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh. And that begs the question, do you risk, and this could be a little early in our conversation, but do you risk changing that dynamic next year with like a coach like Quenneville? Are they going to be starting over? Does he know the players? I mean, that's a lot of things that are going to be weighing on people's mind. I mean, if he goes in, taking over as coach with a 650 winning percentage to finish out the year and possibly making the playoffs or missing the playoffs by one game from the team that was so far out of it, does he, do you change that dynamic of these kids? These kids are working for him. That's my fear. That's my only fear right now is I'm very positive about next year, but I'm also worried about what the coaching dynamic's going to be.
I think that's an interesting thing. I don't really know what to make of Gordon in the long term. I don't think the organization quite knows what to make of Gordon long term. Obviously, when you have, one of the greatest to ever do it in Joel Quenneville out there, it's hard to say we're going to keep Gordon, but at the same time, at the moment, he does have this ship righted, compared to just the dumpster fire that this team was in November and December. He has come in and he's brought a lot of life to this team. And Isaiah, moving forward, do you think Gordon is going to be the guy?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to comment on that and a couple things. Harkening back to something Yariv said about the young players, Voracek, I guess it was about a month ago, he said he looks forward to the time when someone like Nolan Patrick can not only be good for 40 games, but for 60 to 70 games. And that's going to be the difference going forward. And whether Gordon is going to be the guy, I have to really be, I don't want to be a downer, but, there have been teams like Florida, Columbus that have these late season heroics. And the next year, it seems like a lot of pundits favor these teams to do something, and then every year they kind of disappoint. I guess the real question is how much of this, the piece of the pie, is going to be carried by these kids, and whether Gordon is the right guy. Is he really the catalyst for the change? When you consider that Hack was such a dullard, like in hindsight. So it's really hard to say. I mean, I've talked about it on the show before. From the goaltending perspective, I have some insiders that tell me that Gordon might not, you think, well, Gordon, he's an ex-goalie. He might be a really, really good choice to coach Carter Hart. I've had some people say that sometimes goaltenders are the worst coaches for other goalies because their approach coming up is nothing like the modern approach. So if you get a chance to get a guy like Quenneville or a top coach, I think in this market, you really have to go for it because Gordon could always be reassigned back to Lehigh Valley. Obviously, he has a strength at developing young players, and that's what an AHL coach is charged to do.
Yeah, that's my opinion as well. I mean, I like Gordon for the most part. I think overall he's done a good job, but you have somebody like Quenneville. It's so hard to be like, now we're good. We're fine with Gordon. Go away. We don't need you. But like, when you have one of the greatest out there, you bring him in. That's a situation where you pull your checkbook out, you tell him to name a number, and you write that check out and give it to him. It's what they should have done with Mike Babcock years ago when they first brought Dave Haxtell in. They should have went after the big fish, and hopefully they do that this summer. You did mention goaltending. Let's talk about that because it's a situation that is starting to drive me a little nuts. Carter Hart will be back in net against the Capitals, but in the meantime, Brian Elliott has been playing a whole lot of hockey, and for the most part, he's been playing very well. He had that dud against the Capitals where he got pulled, but overall, I think a lot of people, myself included, were worried about what Elliott was going to do through an extended playing time. And overall, I think he's been playing very well. He's not the best guy. He's so slow, but overall, he knows how to handle himself well, and the team really does seem to trust him. And Yariv, I think that has really helped, and that's been something that we've seen from Brian Elliott since he got here. This team does play for this guy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Brian Elliott is a very interesting player, right? Because you watch him play goalie, and nothing about him sticks out. Absolutely nothing. And I think that's kind of why people are underwhelmed by him. But quite frankly, that's not really the role of a goalie, right? The role of the goalie really is to be consistent and to be reliable. That's something he is very good at. I would say that would make him one of the best backup goalies in the league. I don't think any of us argue that he's like a legit number one guy, but I don't necessarily see a guy like Cam Talbot as an upgrade over Brian Elliott. I see somebody who's comparable. And I think if they play well, they should keep going with them. I'm not exactly sure why Brian Elliott is so heavily relied upon. I believe it's actually the way he carries himself. Just being in the locker room, just, kind of seeing the way he answers questions around media. He kind of has like this smirk on his face. He doesn't really seem to get bothered by any questions. And I think that's why coaches really like him. He just seems relaxed, right? He can get beat and not have a problem. And again, the same appeal with Carter Hart, right? Hart has the dynamic ability on top of that, but also very level-headed, very cool in net. I think Brian Elliott really has that. And like you said, right, you never watch him and see him. Like, sometimes he makes a spectacular save, but really, for the most part, his saves, they look simple. But, he comes out properly. He covers the angles properly. He's not fast, but he makes himself big. I think, again, I think just because he's level-headed, and it's another one of those things where fans underestimate predictability. We don't like it that much because it doesn't hit these high highs, right? He's not going to steal playoff series for you. But for a coach that already sees a team full of young players and young defensemen, adding that kind of more veteran, stable guy who won't get rattled at any point, I think probably feels pretty good. And probably why we don't see Talbot yet, right? He's not necessarily part of the culture. He's still getting tried out. And I haven't necessarily got the feel that they're ready to go for Talbot, right? I think they saw an opportunity to evaluate their options moving forward, figured they're going to lose Stolarz anyway. Let's bring in Talbot now, see if he can beat out Elliott, right? I think that's kind of a key thing here, is I think we'll look for that as the season goes on. Will Elliott actually take a back seat at any point? So, and if not, I think it's kind of questionable that we are jumping for joy to sign Talbot, right? They might re-sign Elliott on a one-year deal. I know that sounds crazy and horrible to everybody, but again, you have to look at what's producing and what the coach will do. Personally, I'm ready to move on from Elliott, but as long as I have Carter Hart there, and Sandstrom, who's coming next year, and young guys flowing in, I can handle it. And I think a guy like Talbot could be had at any point during the season for a pick of some sort.
They have to have a veteran behind Hart. But I've seen too many young kids just kind of hit that second year. We know Carey Price struggled his second and third year. I think the dynamic with Elliott is that they like him better than Talbot. They trust him more, but they just don't trust his durability. So I think in Talbot, even this year, I think Gordon's trying to get lock down a playoff spot, if at all possible. But once that evaporates, if that doesn't come to fruition, I think you'll see more of Talbot and Hart, and you'll see Elliott cast aside. So I think one's a move for next year in Talbot, but this year I think they trust Elliott more as long as Hart is not available. That's what I think is going through their minds.
That's essentially what I thought as well. I a little annoyed that we haven't seen a lot of Cam Talbot. Again, Gordon is coaching for his job and he's trying his damnedest to get this team into the playoffs, which is fine. But I think if Talbot is the future, and Chef, this is a question I got asked on BPW Radio this week. When Carter Hart comes back, what do you think the tandem's going to look like? Is it going to be Hart and Talbot? Is it going to be Hart and Elliott?
That's a tough one because Talbot's only played one game, so we don't even really know what we have in Talbot yet. But I think it goes I think you have to go with this. I think it'll be Talbot next year, but for now you ride the hot hand. And aside from that one game against Washington, Elliott been steadier. He's been steadier than he was previously at the beginning of the season. He's doing what did we say before on the show? You don't need to make these incredible highlight reel saves. We don't need that. We need you to make the standard saves, the routine saves, the ones that stop the
momentum saves
or a momentum save. Thank you very much. I was trying to find a word for it. You just got to make that momentum save, and that's what we needed. And I think Elliott has provided that for the most part. I'm going to say 90% of the time in this last bit of stretch, he's done that. So I say for right now, it has to be Hart and Elliott.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You mentioned the Capitals game. Let's talk about the game after the Capitals game, the New York Islanders. There was a bit of a controversy in that one. Jake Voracek suspended 2 games for a hit on Johnny Boychuk. He has since appealed to that suspension. That meeting happened today. We'll probably find out tomorrow what happened, whether he gets, only 1 game or not. Isaiah, what are your thoughts on this Voracek controversy?
Wow, boy. You want to wade into this pool of muck. Look, people are overlooking a couple important factors. And I've watched this hit several times on replay. Number one, Voracek got a major for this infraction. So that means that when they're trying to sum up how this guy should be punished for this hit, which I'm not sure he deserved more than a 2-minute penalty because the puck didn't arrive really at the right time. I mean, the bottom line for me is that Boychuk went to charge at Voracek. And Jake saw him coming and literally got his back up. And they said the point of contact was the head. But I watched it. Some people are claiming that he hit him with the elbow. I didn't see an elbow. I saw I saw a scapula. He hit him with a scapula, and that's your shoulder blade. Now, are like there's 2 shoulder blades on every player. Does that mean every player has like these 2 weapons in their back? I mean, the range of motion of a scapula is about 2 inches, if that. So all he did was try to keep himself from getting crushed. He got a 5-minute major. Here's a guy who played, I think it was Mikey O&B on Twitter was saying he's played like 800 games, and I don't think he's ever been suspended before.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, and
no history.
Right. So he gave him 2 games after what happened with Malkin swinging a stick, and everybody knows Malkin is a slew foot specialist. Look, this league is really going to look bad if the player can't protect himself, and in trying to estimate when the guy is going to get there and run into him, to me, look, he already had to serve a game. He should not have served. A 5-minute major was more than sufficient. I would be honest with you. I think it's 50-50 that they revoked that other game. I think he's going to play against Washington 50-50.
There's a chance.
Yeah, I don't know if he – there's a part of me that would like to think that they're going to do the right thing and overturn it and just give him 1 game, but then the other part of me goes, well, it's the Department of Player Safety. They can't do anything right. They're probably going to keep 2. So,
it does look like Vetman is sleeping on this one, right? They met today, I believe, and now decision's supposed to come tomorrow. Typically, that does not happen for a 2-game suspension. Like, that's the one thing. NHLPA does not normally file for appeals on something like this, not at a 2-game suspension. But I think a lot of people are kind of looking at this as a very suspect sentence. I honestly expected a fine. I did not expect 2 games. A fine I already thought was way more than was necessary for what happened.
Yeah,
actually, I thought of everything that comes out of this. I thought, one, it shouldn't have been a 5-minute major. It should have been 2 minutes for interference and then 2 minutes for roughing afterwards. If anything, I thought it could have been called charging by Boychuk, but or a double minor that ensued afterwards. It should have been offsetting double minors, in my opinion. It should have been a fine, maybe to Voracek, if that, like maybe a $10,000 fine, if that. I think the suspension's way out of line. As I said, I looked at that hit about, I'm not going to lie, 20 times. And what I saw was neither one of them going for the puck. That is in a problem in itself, but neither one of them actually made a motion to the puck. The puck was further ahead. If either one of them kept skating, we're not even talking about this right now. But Voracek saw that he was going to get hit, and Voracek did what he did mostly his career. He protected himself, thinking he was going to get to the puck, but he never pursued the puck. So here comes Boychuk flying in, and it's just a mess ensued. I really don't think. I think that they're going to eliminate the second game out of this, and who knows, they could instill a fine, which is completely possible still, to appease a lot of the masses of the flyer haters out there.
Yeah, and don't forget the 10-minute misconduct that Voracek should have got for WrestleMania.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Voracek didn't brace himself, Voracek would have run him over in the corner. Like, this would have been bad for one player, one way or the other. You know, they weren't concerned about the play, they were concerned about hitting. And if Voracek was going to hit him, he was going to get crushed in the corner, or Voracek stopped, put his weight back, and defended himself and turned Voracek inside out. You know, and the 2-game suspension is what really bothers me, because how many hits have we seen over the last 2-3 weeks even that didn't get called? You had Anthony Mantha, who damn near killed, who was it? Claude Giroux?
Yeah.
You got
that was a crush
Gabriel shot. Gabriel got 1 game for boarding Patrick. You had the Hathaway hit from Calgary where he tried to kill Luke Kunin, and that didn't get anything. It's like, it's amazing that it was 2 games.
You know what bugs me more? Yeah. You know what bugs me more than anything is this cry bully syndrome. In other words, the people who are the predators, the ones who initiate everything. And when it doesn't work out where the other guy's crushed, he gets hurt. That's what gets him incensed, because he's just getting a taste of his own medicine.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that.
It's like when you punch the bully back in the nose, and
then you're the one that gets in trouble.
And you get the cops show up at your house. You know what I mean? That's what happens.
Exactly.
I mean, realistically, that play that happened. I mean, Voracek does that at least 5 times a game. Like, that's how he plays along the walls. So that being a penalty is news to me, right?
Yeah, it's like right out of Peter Forsberg's been doing that for years.
Yeah.
I was just about to bring him up. Another one, Adam Oates played a similar style too, where he protected the puck.
Exactly.
Yeah, we gotta make an appeal and get Forsberg out of the Hall of Fame. Let's start now.
Blasphemy. I hear you.
Well, let's talk a little about last night's game against the Senators. It felt like a trap game if ever there was one. And early on, it certainly seemed like the Flyers were going to fall in, but they dug out. And again, it was the young guys, Patrick, Lindblom, Myers, that, pulled this team through. And again, it's the fact that the kids are rising to the occasion is what really continues to make this end of the season worth it, whether they make the playoffs or not. I think the fact that they came back against a team like Ottawa that they should have been beating handily in the first place, it was a good sign. And Yariv, I think when you see the young guys that step up and lead the team, where they're not relying on Couturier and Giroux every single night to carry them, and that's really important moving forward.
It's awesome. I mean, honestly, like, you can see it in the lineup decisions Gordon's making, right? He finally felt confident enough to separate or to bring Giroux and Couturier back, right? He's been playing around with it, during games, but he doesn't start his game like that, right? He really wants to put that top line together. Let's be honest. He knows how effective Voracek, Giroux, and Couturier are. He just doesn't want to put all his eggs in one basket. Having said that, if you have guys like Lindblom, Patrick, and Konechny who start on their own carrying lines, which I think you see a lot with Patrick of lately, you see some of that with Konechny making plays along on the wing. If they're able to produce and drive play on their own, then all of a sudden now they can start playing with reliable players, right? Like Scott Lawton, like Ryan Hartman, guys who maybe can't drive play but can play a two-way game. And all of a sudden your lineup starts filling out, right? And it opens up the potential for the off season. Really, it's huge. It's huge. Let's be honest. We have another wave of young players coming next year. We're hoping Frost, Ratcliffe, Lashinsky, Allison. Let's can go down the name of guys who are all about NHL, ready, or at least getting close within a year. We really need the ones that are here to take a jump, right? So the other ones can kind of come in. Myers was able to come in because Sanheim took a jump, right? We want to bring them all, but we can't bring them all at once. So once the younger guys kind of make that leap and kind of go off, and now they can be considered kind of veterans, at least from a maintenance standpoint, it makes everything easier, right? It makes the off season easier, right? Like before, in the beginning of the season, we thought we needed a second line center for Patrick. Do we need a second line center now? Probably not. We probably need a third line center again, right? A reliable one that if there's injury or an issue, he can slide up, right? So we need a good third line center. But seeing Patrick, right, outrace a player last night, out-muscle him, look like a young Joe Thornton, let's be honest. If he can play that way, you put Lindblom, Patrick, and Konechny as a line, that is, in my mind, one of the future top lines of the Flyers. So, when you start seeing the results on the ice, it gets really exciting. In a night, you get tired of saying if Claude Giroux or Couturier don't show up tonight, or Voracek, we're kind of screwed. But it seems like that's not really the case anymore. And that's how you win. You win with depth, right? You win with talented depth, not just guys who can play in the NHL. Look at Tampa Bay. They're 5 lines deep. It's no matter injuries, no matter matchups, you just can keep attacking, and I think that's really crucial. And I think somebody, you guys mentioned Scott Lawton earlier, who is younger than people, really want to give credit for because he's been here so long. But he might make another jump for all we know. Who knows if he doesn't end up being like a John Madden type of guy who is a third line player, but eventually produces 40 points and plays against teams' top players. We really don't know. This team is younger than it seems. We've been carried by veterans, very good ones, and very sparse amount of veterans for a while. Now, we don't really have to do that. So it's really nice to see.
Yeah, I saw a tweet. I don't remember who it was from, but I saw a tweet the other day, like, Scott Lawton is the type of player that they should demand their bottom six to be like because he's that good. The offense hasn't come yet. He's having the greatest season and just can't bury a puck to save his life lately.
Crazy.
But, he does 11 goals and 16 assists through 69 games, but his overall play has been fantastic. And I think that is something that moving forward they need. I think guys like Lawton are what make teams really, really good because you have somebody like that can plug well into your bottom six. They can move up a little bit, into the second line if they have to. But overall, the talent that guys like Scott Lawton have, and, even guys like Ryan Hartman that can come in and kind of stir the pot in a very positive way. Chef, right. I think moving forward, this bottom six, is going to have to be built with guys like Lawton and Hartman, if they, and then they can add their young guys in. Guys like, Ratcliffe can step in and I think play a very solid role just like that.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely with you. I mean, look, who do you have leaving unrestricted free agents? I think it's Roney, Knight, Raffle. Raffle's one of them. Lawton's actually, I think, a restricted free agent. You got a couple of them too, but if you don't feel like you need to, if you're looking at like the farm system that Yariv has been talking about, like if you're looking at that and going, how close are these guys ready? I mean, Lawton should get a pretty decent bump from what he's making. Like not much. I wouldn't pay him more than $2, maybe $1.5 to $2 million range, but it gives you a lot of play in your bottom six and give these kids their shot at coming up. You want to make your bones? All right, be those people that work hard, because look at Lawton is that perfect example. Hard work does pay off, and you need to plug that. Well, we said it on this show before too. The Phantoms have got to be pretty decent too. So you're always going to need players that are going to be bouncing up and in between. And it might not be career NHLers, and they might be not career AHLers. There might be journeyman guys that go back and forth. And I think that is a case to be made with some of these guys that we've drafted, that Hextall picked, that we think, on paper look great, but they're actually going to be third, fourth liners and maybe career AHLs.
Yep.
Yeah, and, guys like Michael Raffle, who had just a great game last night. I've always liked Raffle. He's not going to produce a ton of offense at all. He's 30 years old, but he is a good, safe, solid pair of hands you put out there. He's not going to produce a whole lot of offense, but he can play anywhere in the lineup. He can be productive. He can play really good, solid hockey. His contract is up at the end of the year. He's making $2.3 million now. And Isaiah, I think that's a good thing with a lot of these kids is guys like Lawton and Raffle, they play really solid hockey, but you're not going to have to necessarily pay them a whole lot. And they should be easy to re-sign this summer and to continue to keep the bottom six producing.
Michael Raffle, he's somebody they could re-sign. They can't have all kids out there. What did he play? Game number 400 last night. He had a nice, very nice game. If you look at Tampa, and I think it was Yariv was talking about it earlier, just a cautionary tale with some of these prospects that are coming here. What Eisman did with Tampa was really remarkable. relating it to the Flyers and guys like Allison and Ratcliffe and Farabee and Frost, who'll be a pro next year somewhere. Yzerman, if you look about 3/4 of the lineup in the forward ranks, had at least 50 games in the AHL. So he brought these guys kind of like along what Hextall wanted to do. He got these guys some seasoning in the minors first. So if you recall his comment about bringing guys up when they're 23 as opposed to bringing them up when they're 20 or 21. So we're still cycling through that. And that makes the case that re-signing a guy like Raffl is, even at 30 for a fourth liner, is a good investment maybe, because for all the reasons that Dan was talking about, you don't want a whole bunch of kids. Some kids are going to take a step back, and it wouldn't be the worst thing. And if you think about what the Flyers may do in the offseason, we'll talk about that, I guess, how much of a splash they make. But if they add a couple UFAs or get a trade or what have you, it's going to push guys like Lindblom or other guys further down into the lineup. So your fourth line would be Raffl, Lawton, and maybe Hartman. And that's not the worst thing in the world. We'll just have more talent.
Yeah, and, going back to Tampa for a second, their team is just as stacked as it is. They did bring in a couple stars. They brought in, McDonough and Callahan and all these other guys. But you look at this team, a lot of their superstars are homegrown. Braden Point, Tyler Johnson was an undrafted rather. But Kucherov and Palat and just all these kids that have come in, they drafted themselves. And I think it's very good to see, some of the Flyers prospects are still in kind of a questionable state as to what their ceiling will be. But for the most part, the guys like Frosts and Ratcliffes and, the Farabees, these kids that are showing all this promise early on, it does lead to that kind of better roster in the future, because they're not going to need to go out and bring all these guys in. When they do feel like they're ready to finally fully compete, they can go out and they can get that McDonough and that, Stamkos and whoever else they need to bring in to push that team to the next level. And I think that's a good thing. And I think moving forward, we're going to talk about this a little bit. Their summer options are very interesting. There are some bigger named free agents out there. There are, obviously, the Flyers have enough, assets and prospects and picks, to make a couple trades if they really wanted. Chef, what do you think we're going to see out of the Flyers this summer in terms of additions?
Now that's the real kicker, isn't it? I mean, if we're believing that the Flyers have a legitimate top four defenseman, right? I'm still not sold on that yet. I want to see a little bit more. But if we are believing that, I think they go and they make a big splash. They get a forward and a scoring guy. And we all know the bread man, but there's a lot of rumors. I mean, I think on one of our shows, we actually heard that, Panarin was actually impressed that Columbus went out of their way to sign all these people to try to win now. So whether or not they go forward in the playoffs, I think it all depends on them. If he's going to be even available, he might, who knows, he might test everything and then still sign, drive up his price. Who cares at this point? For him, it doesn't matter. But I actually think they're going to go out and get a scorer, because I think that's the one thing this team is lacking. And we have seen the growth of our defensemen, the young ones, Myers, Provy's come back. And, geez, I can't believe the difference, like you guys stated earlier, the difference in Ghost since he's been paired with Myers. He's just like a different player. I finally think that maybe we have some stability on defense. And if you have a starting goalie that is Carter Hart, I think you need to worry about the scoring now, because I think that that's the one spot we're lacking that we can't address right away through the farm system to bring up guys that kind of shadow and learn. I think you need that sniper.
Just going to interject there about the defense. I think I tweeted out last night that Ghost looks so comfortable with Myers because he feels like he doesn't have to force plays. He has another defenseman who can kind of keep the offensive momentum going. And because Myers is very competent, he can make those outlet passes, and he can also cover for Ghost because he skates well. And I'm wondering if Phil Myers is what raises the Flyers' estimation of what Ghost can be with them going forward, whereas maybe in the past they were thinking Ghost was a prime trade candidate. I'm wondering if Phil Myers could actually be the guy that saves Shane Gostisbehere from being traded.
Yeah.
It's possible, and I think, again, I'm going to go back to kind of what Chef said here. I think their priority should be a forward. Realistically, they're probably not going to spend a whole lot of money re-signing their own players this summer. They do have Konechny, Prover, and Sanheim are the three big guys that are going to need contracts. And realistically, they can probably all sit on bridge deals because I don't really know what, guys like Konechny or Provorov, or even Sanheim to that extent, are worth in the long term. Do you lock them up to a Gostisbehere deal, 4.5 for 5-6 years? Do you, just lock them up short term, small money for 2-3 years? But realistically, I think a forward is the way to go. It would not hurt bringing in, a top 4 defenseman to help, just to solidify things. But I think a center, a legitimate second line center that could, swap back and forth between second and third line with Nolan Patrick is probably the way to go. I think they need a little more help overall producing that offense and kind of get them to the next level. Chef said there's not anybody immediately. I think even if by chance Morgan Frost, makes the NHL out of camp, I just don't think that they should rely on him to be that offensive guy yet. Bringing in somebody that can help them score, no matter who it is, Yariv, I think that's exactly what they need right now.
Yeah, totally. I was just totally agreeing with you on everything you said there. And I think, we hear that that typical line, you build down the middle out of your back end. Well, that's kind of what we've done, right? Right. I know I mentioned this a while ago. Hextall did have a plan. He was more patient than anybody was willing to be. Personally, he probably did just enough, till people got sick of his methods, right? But one thing he did get us, right, is that foundation from the back end out. You have the young players now solidified. You have the goaltender, right? Maybe they're not ready, but they're building. And really, if you're going to shift Giroux over to wing, which seems like that's what's happening, you really want to solidify your top 3 centers. Scott Lawton's great. We don't want to rely on him to be a 20-goal scorer, right? That's why we're going to overpay for Paul Stastny over the summer, right? We really want that guy who, if you have that play driver in the middle who can play the two-way game, you can mix and match your wingers much easier. And I think it's been a big problem this year, right? We essentially have been rolling 3 lines here at the end, doing well, but we don't have confidence in our 4th line at all, quite frankly. I mean, we do kind of, but when you go for the extra D-man every single time rather than calling up Bailey or calling up another forward, I mean, it's pretty clear that that's not where they think their strength is. And I think another forward, and 100% agree with you guys, it's great to assume that a kid will come and put up points. He probably won't. He'll probably need time. So why not have a guy who can carry that kid and allow him to thrive? And I think that's something important to notice about Nolan Patrick. Again, you saw how Patrick's game improved when he had the support of G and Couturier being centerman also. It takes pressure off of the young kid, allows him to find his game. We do not want Morgan Frost or German Rubtsov or Tandil Lushinsky or name anybody who could play third-line center, to come in and be relied to put up 40 points and then struggle and then sit. And that's not what we want, right? We want to be able to casually shift them to the wing, right? We saw that with Vorobiev as well. And I think if we could find that center, as long as our center spots are full, you can pretty much interchange young players after that. Sean Couturier is a great example of that, right? You can play him with anyone at this point. And in my opinion, he's an elite number 1 center at this point, and everybody else excels around him because of his ability to be reliable.
You know what I want to jump in right there.
Yeah. Sure.
Can I jump in right there? I just want to add,
totally.
like, him and Lindbaum together. I mean, just the other night, the passing from the other games, that snipe shot from, I think it was Coots, it was like one of the hardest shots I've seen. And there seems to be this chemistry, even without Voracek in the last game, this chemistry between both of them, that they're playing together. And that really, I mean, when it's Lindbaum, Voracek, and Coots together, that the Flyers actually have two really decent scoring lines then.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, like you had said before, all their eggs in one basket. And I think that it's really, blossomed together. I mean, I was ashamed. I was upset that Patrick and Lindbaum were separated earlier in the season. But right now, I cannot even be more happy. One of them has found a niche with another player, and it's feeding off of that energy, and I love it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think it's the chemistry in the team right now overall it's so much better than it was. When during the final couple games of Dave Haxtell's tenure back in, I believe it was December, he got canned, January, whenever it was. The team they went out there night after night after night and just nothing, flat, no kind of life whatsoever. They were getting beat left and right. They were hanging stolers out to dry every single night. And the fact that they came in and, whether it's the coaching, whether it's the players themselves, this team is they're just going right now. I mean, they're, 18-4-2 since January 14th. I mean, that's incredible. They're putting that's
incredible.
The pace of, that's almost the pace of the Tampa Bay Lightning in that sense. If they did this from the beginning of the season, the Eastern Conference would have been all theirs, but, at the end of the day, this is something, and that's the good part. They have a good team to build off going into next year. And whether they do add a defenseman or a forward, they're going to have the money to play with. They have the money, they have the assets. They can bring in anybody they want. And I think that at least in the short term, if they do feel like this team is going to be competitive next year, they can bring in somebody like, say an Erik Karlsson or, whoever they want, whatever big name guy they want to bring in to make sure this team can push forward. And I think going forward, Isaiah, that's going to be a big part of this team is, Fletcher needs to have a big summer. He needs to have a big summer internally, signing the guys to manageable contracts. And he needs to have kind of that groundbreaking summer that we all expected last season out of Hextall, and he didn't give to us. They need to bring somebody in, I think, whether it's a forward defenseman or both, that is really going to get this team out of the gate fast next season.
Yeah, well, let me give you a couple updates. In between periods during the Washington game that the Flyers lost, Bob McKenzie talked about Scott Gordon and how he raised the bar for other candidates and gave himself a chance and made the job more attractive, which at the end of the day might be Gordon's best accomplishment. But in terms of players, he still hears that the Flyers want a center to insulate a Couturier and Patrick, a vet D-man to play with Provorov. And they have their goalie, apparently, whether they're reconsidering Elliott, which I doubt, or Talbot, which would be the original plan. But today, I just got a hold of something from Chris Nichols, who was quoting Darren Drager, who was on a TSN station. And let me get that for you. Okay. Drager says that the Flyers have a lot of players that are in the prime, that are coming out of their prime, and they have a nice balance, and they can make a move pretty quickly. And he even raised the possibility of the Flyers going after big-time Karlsson and Panarin. I don't know how realistic that is, but according to Drager, it almost feels like the perfect fit. Chuck is the type of guy that could pull that off. And he speaks very highly of Fletcher in terms of he's a hard worker. He has a great personality for attracting free agents, very professional. He learned a lot from his father. And he talked a lot about what a great market Philadelphia is. And on the other side, I'm going to add my own comments. I really do believe, and I said this on an earlier show, that what other teams are doing in town definitely affects the Flyers. And I think drove a lot of the events behind Hextall's firing. Here in year 5, the Flyers are just kind of, twiddling their thumbs. Meanwhile, you had the Eagles win a Super Bowl. You had the Sixers at that juncture had gone through the process and were about to make a lot of big trades. I think they just acquired Butler or real close. And, of course, since then, they got Tobias Harris. Now you see the Phillies with Harper. I think it's ratcheting up the pressure because the Flyers are sinking down in the estimation of a lot of fans in terms of they're really anchored in 4th place, and the only shining light that they've had in the city really has been Carter Hart. So I think all these confluence of factors are going to have the Flyers thinking really big coming up this summer. I'm a little wary myself of Carlson because he's going to get paid a lot, and I'm worried about his durability. But maybe a guy like Jacob Trouba, who's an RFA, who apparently is not going to be sticking in Winnipeg. Maybe I might give up assets for somebody like him. He can play with Provorov. He can play. I mean, he's a top 3 defenseman. And if Panarin's not a possibility, then I have a lot of questions as to what they can do because I'm not a big fan of just adding Duchesne to this lineup. I guess you guys could talk about that. I think having Duchesne, Voracek, and JVR on the same team gives you 3 guys making around $8 million AAV that don't play hard minutes. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. And Charlie O'Connor said something I really agree with. Ryan O'Reilly was really an opportunity for Ron Hextall that he really, I mean, looking at the package St. Louis gave up, he would look real good in this lineup right now. So these are some of my thoughts regarding what they're doing and what they might need.
Yeah, this past summer, I was a big advocate in them bringing in Paul Stastny. I went to Ryan O'Reilly or Tyler Bozak, something to come in and help this team, in the middle six and their scoring and their centers. And I think they really needed somebody. And when Hextall didn't do that and they brought in Van Riemsdyk, it's like, that's great and all, but that's not really what they needed. And I think you're absolutely right on with Duchesne. I think Duchesne is more of that, more of a secondary scoring kind of guy. And given that they already have Van Riemsdyk and Voracek and, all these guys that are just kind of there and producing a little bit of numbers at the time, but not that, legitimate scorer, that lead scorer that they need, I think that makes sense. I think that's the best thing that they can do is bring in a guy that can make sense, whether it's Panarin or, somebody else. I don't know how realistic it is that they get Panarin or Carlson or both. I think in the short term, money-wise, they can make that work. I think they're going to be struggling in, 4 or 5 years down the road if they get both of them. But, overall, I think it's, you're right. I think Chuck Fletcher is a guy that isn't afraid to make big moves. And, looking back, put their horrible contracts aside, look back to the summer of 2012. They brought Parise and Suter in, and it wasn't the best signing, but overall, he added 2 elite guys to the lineup. Now, the Wild haven't done anything with that.
Yeah, but that was the owner. The owner comes from Nashville, where he had to sell the franchise, gets with a much more cash-rich situation in Minnesota and wants to make a splash. And kind of like Ed Snyder, Leopold says to Fletcher, go get him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I just think Fletcher needs to be aggressive this season, no matter who it is. And moving forward, that should be, it's going to be a fun summer one way or another. I hope that the Flyers really do kind of make some moves and some entertainment. Again, they have a lot to figure out. What do you do with the goaltending? Do they stick with Cam Talbot as the guy of the future? Do they bring Elliott back because they seem to rely on him so heavy? The forwards, defensemen, they got all kinds of fun stuff. Before we wrap up here today, something happened. The Stadium Series show called Wired Reactions was put on CSN a couple of days ago. Overall, the fan base, I haven't watched it full yet, but I've seen all the GIFs and the videos that people have made online. Yariv, what are your thoughts on, Travis Konechny and Giroux and all the chirping that happened?
Well, I will say this. I actually just watched that yesterday. I missed the live version of that when it went on television. I actually didn't even find out until afterwards. I will say I particularly like this more than 24/7, which is saying a lot because 24/7 when it first came out was fantastic. They really did a great job of creating a narrative around that game. Hearing their personalities kind of uncensored, as much as you could say uncensored, was awesome and made you realize that a lot of players are a lot louder than you kind of think. And I mean, in particular, certain personalities. I think a lot of people kind of were shocked at the stuff that Konechny said. Personally, I'm not. I think he's shown that the entire time he's been here, right? I actually see Ryan Hartman as being a very similar type of player to Konechny, just without the same type of skill. It's like that gritty type of, speedy, powerful skater, slightly undersized with grit. And I really love that episode because and I would highly recommend all Flyers fans watch that through. You really saw the players' personalities, how Simmons is a little tough to watch there, right? But Simmons he had so much heart in the way he carried himself in that game. And you can just see the way he gets everybody jacked up. And, I'm in the locker room now, and I see a little bit of that in the locker room, but you really don't catch it as raw as that video did. They don't realize they're on camera in those moments. They will say what they actually say. And I thought that was really great. And I love that a guy like Travis Konechny has kind of owned that role now, since it's kind of obvious that Simmons is gone. You kind of see that Patrick, Konechny, some of the younger guys almost kind of want to feel that they have to fill his shoes in a way, which I would say testament to Simmons. I think that's a sign of true leadership, right? When you leave and somebody who looked up to you, kind of tries to take your spot. I mean, it shows how much of an impact he was on the team overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chef, do you have any opinions on the Wired reactions?
I loved it. I didn't get to see all of it yet, but you know what? In hockey, there's a lot of things out there, and chirping is one of them. And over the years, the characters that we've loved in Philly have been the ones that chirp the loudest. And TK is no exception to that. Some of the stuff he said, I don't even get it. Eat it up. Like what?
Yeah.
What I mean, some of it you laugh
That was,
at it. You go, that some of it's funny and it's stupid because it really doesn't mean anything. But it was driving. What was that? You got a weapon there, eh? Waving that thing around. When he was talking to Mal, and Malkin just just goes, oh, just shut up. Like you're getting to him, and I think.
Right.
During the history, if you look back at all the Flyers games, especially with the Penguins, that was the perfect game to mic it up.
Great.
It was.
Yep. Totally. And just to give a little bit of context without cutting anybody off, that the reason he was saying eat it up, so that was to Jack Johnson, who had the knee-on-knee with Patrick, and then Patrick came back, leveled him against the boards. Everybody remembers that hit. That was Konechny kind of talking shit to him a little bit, like eat it up, like, that's revenge. Kind of that's what he's saying. Eat it up.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit extra. So a little context behind that. But yeah, I agree. It was awesome.
Yeah, you know what else came through when I was watching that? Ian LaPerriere. He came off like a lug. Like this is not like a real high IQ hockey guy. Is it hit him? Yeah. Like typical. Like what's the word I'm looking for?
Too many pucks to the face.
Yeah, he's like Punch Drunk. And I know he took the puck to the brain and all that. But he's a super triathlete. So boy, I tell you, man. I mean, I'm looking forward to staff changes next year because that guy. I mean, I look at him and I just, man, he is dumb. I mean, I kept thinking it's just got like a real dim bulb. I'm like, all right. What's this guy going to teach you? To jump in front of pucks and get your face all splashed in? But I don't know, man. I love the guy, for the sacrifice he made. But I think the penalty kill, the catalyst behind the change, even though it got a little bit better right before Hackstall got fired, really the catalyst for change with both our specialty units has been Gordon. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens going forward. That's for sure.
Yeah, LaPerriere was more or less the scapegoat early in the season, and quite frankly, the penalty kill still isn't that good. It's 77.9%. That's 26th in the league, but overall we haven't heard a lot about it over the past few months since Gordon took over. I think the team overall has improved. Well, boys, it has been a fun night. I'm so glad I got to host this show. Let's start getting some plugs. Yariv, you have any plugs to get on?
Yeah. So I guess real quick, I will be writing more stuff for Philly Sports Network. For the end of the season, I'll have a full season review. I am starting to do video content as well, just starting it now. That'll be released on Philly Sports Network's YouTube channel and on Twitter and whatnot, and that'll just be me. But look out for more stuff from Philly Sports Network in general. All the writers release good stuff. Keep looking out for us, and we're going to keep covering the team and live all the way to the end of the season and hopefully into the playoffs. And look out for more stuff.
Chef, where can these good people find you on Twitter?
Chef to the left B at Twitter, and Also, this man, I'm at Steam Pub. I'm actually the chef at Steam Pub in Southampton, PA. If you want to come in and say hi, say hi. Mention Dan's top 5 list. How about that? Especially this goalie fight one that's coming out soon. I can't wait for that. And if you mention that, I'll give you 20% off. I'll come out to ask for me.
There you go.
Get all the details about Steam Pub on Twitter at Steam Pub.
Yes.
That's right. Well, Isaiah, where can they find you on Twitter?
Well, if they want to, they can get me at Isaiah, ISAIAH, very important, _520, at Isaiah _520. And, of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. And, Dan, you have a whole panoply of information for us, so why don't you hit it?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, I've been Dan the Flyer Fan. You can find me on Twitter at Dan the Flyer Fan. You can find my site at Brotherly Puck, brotherlypuck.com. If you want to find my podcast, you can do that at brotherly_pod. You can count down Carter Hart's wins with me at Hart Countdown on Twitter. Tomorrow, I will be back on my show with the Angry Negative Show. With Angry Jim will be joining me. And on Monday night, I have a special guest on Brotherly Pod. Isaiah will make his Brotherly Pod debut Monday night as part of Crossover Week here. So that'll be the first. High and Wide Radio will join me on Wednesday, and co-founder of Brotherly Puck, Garrett Parker, will join me on Friday night. So it'll be a fun week next week. Isaiah will lead it off on Monday. You're going to wrap it up here, Isaiah?
Yeah, sure. Just before we go, the O&B Puckcast is brought to you by, again, PhillySportsNetwork.com and Wildfire Radio. Check out their content. And just remember, if you could subscribe to the O&B Puckcast on one of several formats. We were hoping to have a couple new platforms announced for you. We'll check that out. As soon as we have them secured, we'll definitely let you know. But the subscription really helps drive the show up the ratings, which allows us to bring you a lot more good stuff like we brought to you so far, we hope. Anyway, with that, until next time, let's go Flyers, and everybody, take care.